Wouldn't it be nice to be able to not only see the quality of work of someone you're about to hire, but actually know and get an idea of how it is to work with them? And in other words, not just to see what they do, but how they do it, and if it's a good fit for a working relationship with you. Well, when it comes to working with my team at Increase Creative, that's exactly what we allow you to do at no cost and no risk to you. You could start your first custom design at no cost to you, and you only pay if you actually like the process and you like the final product. You can get started with your first custom design for free at increasecreative.co, and you only pay if you like what you see. So to get started, again, head over to increasecreative.co. That's increasecreative.co. Start your first custom design for free and only pay if you like what you see.
Everybody, welcome back to the Church Advance Podcast. It's Bryan Sams here with my friend Luke Clayton. And Luke, I want to give a shout out to our podcast sponsors over at servehq.church. What a great organization, a great opportunity to really be a help and blessing to churches that are in the struggle of communication and offering training. Why don't you take it and give us a minute about this good business and this good company?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know that great churches, they don't just happen. You have to build those teams and you have to do it intentionally. But how do you do it when you don't equip them the right way? And, like we said about this sponsor in the past, like, trying to get everybody there at the same time, for the same schedule. I mean, how many times inevitably have you tried to schedule, a new volunteers meeting or something like that, and you're expected 12 people and only 9 showed up,
Right.
and so what do you do about the 3 that didn't show? Well, that's where Serve HQ comes in. It allows you to take all that training and move it online so that people can watch, volunteers can watch that content at a kind of their own pace. It simplifies that onboarding process, and it has that also built-in accountability, so you can see who's completing the training and so forth. And it makes that training where it's just repeatable. There's no more having to, again, you don't have to have that new volunteers meeting every quarter or every 6 months or whatever. You record it once, and it just, it's just there for them to watch as many times as they need to. It's mobile friendly. There's so many things that it's going to help you with, but of course, probably the most important thing, it's going to free up the time of you and your leadership so that you can focus on ministry and not constantly training and retraining. So servehq.church, that is the website. Go to www.servehq.church to connect, to sign up, to learn more. And thanks to Serve HQ for sponsoring the Church Advance podcast.
Yes, sir. Those guys are great. Servehq.church. I got to tell you, I was just talking to my wife the other day. She has recently handed off to our church social media, and part of that is our video clips, and then some quotes that we're grabbing off of Sermon Shots, which is another great tool that I use. So I went to go in my first time and try to do a couple of these quotes, and man, I didn't know what I was doing. And I quickly gave up, and I told her, I said, look, man, I don't have time to learn and do something I'm not equipped to learn how to do. And that's the same thing I feel like with this group, servehq.church. I mean, it's like, are you going to spend all your time trying to learn a software, trying to learn how to video, trying to learn how to do this when you're not good at it, you're not equipped at it? Let somebody help you if you need it. And I think that's where they come in and do just a fantastic job. So shout out to those guys. Hey, listen, I want to talk today about church cancel culture, specifically independent Baptist cancel culture. I know that this isn't just clickbait. It is something that I think we all, many people have experienced. And I will say this at the outset, IFB is not the only cancel culture. It's my frame of reference of cancel culture.
Yeah.
And there is cancel culture in many other types of religious organizations or others, but in my world and experience, it seems to be that there is a particular proneness to.
Well, I was gonna say, it seems like in the IFB they have a lot of reasons to cancel you. They create a lot of reasons to cancel people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the reason that is because, and let me give you a little context for this. I've done quite a bit of history research in the Independent Baptist movement. One of the reasons why I moved away from it was that I learned that I believe it became more of a cultural fundamentalism that was identified with markers that were not historic markers of fundamentalism. So if you back up fundamentalism to the early 1900s, when it had its origins, it was truly based on the fundamentals of the faith, meaning the inspiration of the Bible, the death, burial, resurrection, and atonement of Jesus Christ. The things that actually really are fundamental. And how I define fundamental is this: something is a fundamental if it is necessary for you to be a Christian. That's the most fundamental thing
Yeah.
out there, right? Outside of that, you begin to have denominational differences. You begin to have sectarian issues. I'm not saying they're all not important, but what happened was, as fundamentalism moved on in the middle of the 1900s, there was a new evangelicalism, a new kind of evangelicalism that sought to kind of bridge the gap between the two. It was like a moderate evangelicalism. It was accommodating to theological liberalism and error. So all of a sudden, fundamentalism moved the line a little bit and drew the line a little different. We're no longer just separating from liberals, people who don't believe the Bible. We're now separating from people who don't separate from liberals.
Yeah.
Okay, and then from there, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when the independent Baptist culture got rootin' and tootin', and we all know the story, they're fastest growing churches in America, led by brazen personalities like Jack Hyles and others that were separating from the Southern Baptist Convention because, again, they weren't separating from liberals. Then these personalities began to take on some real extreme different opinions about things like dress, standards, musical preferences, translations, and so on and so forth. And then, so all of a sudden, we then inherit a independent Baptist culture,
Mm-hmm.
not separating over theological liberalism. It's not separating over people that don't believe in the blood of Jesus. It's not separating over people that don't believe in the inspired Bible or the literal second coming. We're now separating from people because their music's different, because they are, not King James only, and so on and so forth. And I'm not just trying to beat a same horse that I've beaten before. I'm specifically talking about this idea that when you corner yourself so far deep into this hole, that all of a sudden you end up canceling people, not because they're like an actual liberal, but because they are different from you on one of these points that you painted yourself in this corner about. Elevating whatever that said thing is to a test of fellowship, and therefore being willing to cancel other people. I mean, I'm going to give you three accounts here that I could give you in recent days. I mean, I've been canceled by numbers of people, but these are one like more visible, more obvious ones that happened to me in the last couple of years. Okay. One, very recently, I was preaching at a youth conference. Okay. This was the first night I preached 3 nights. First night of the youth conference was really just extraordinary. Several churches came together. The first night we had multiple kids saved. I mean, it was tremendous service. Arrived the second night, and the pastor called me into his office and said, "Hey, I just want you to know this church found out that you weren't King James only, and they're not coming back to the meeting." Now I want you to get this picture. 2 days prior to that, the same church, which had a Christian school, invited me to preach in chapel. Now I declined because I had something else that I had already had on my schedule, but the same church just days before had invited me to preach in chapel. Then they come to the service that night, which, by the way, I used the King James because I was at a church that uses the King James.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Did you actually use the King James? It sounds like you were.
Yeah, 100%. But somehow, and I think I know what happened, because I met the youth pastor and I won't divulge too much information about him, but he, basically he had never met me before, and I just asked me, ended up that he had come from a Bible college that was familiar to me, and he had said, he had said, uh, well, and I said, oh, well, I used to teach at a college in California. I told him, and he said, oh, really? When? And he, I had sisters who went there during that time. And here's what I think happened. He didn't know me. Then he made that connection with me. I think he must have went maybe that night and messaged his sisters. Hey, I met this guy that was there saying, I think somehow whoa, did you know? Did you know?
Yeah. Well, also, Brian, it doesn't take much of a Google of your name to figure out where you've changed your stance on some things over the
Yeah, and
years. And that's the unfortunate thing about publishing stuff on the internet here.
yeah, I mean, but again, I'm in an independent Baptist church that uses the King James. I have a King James version. Of course, nobody says anything about any versions. We're just there preaching and ministering to kids. I mean, literally, like almost, I think it was like 10, like a bunch of kids got saved. I mean, it was one of those, it was like a
Yeah.
real highlight.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, it wasn't that I used a different translation. It was that I don't have the same position they have.
Yeah.
So this is the definition of cancel culture. It's actually a definition of King James onlyism on the extreme, which is
Mm-hmm.
not only do you have to use the King James version, you also have to believe that it's the only one you should use.
Yeah.
You see
Yeah.
that? You see that jump there? So all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, you're not just separating over people who don't use the King James. You're separating over people who don't believe exactly like you believe about the
Yeah.
King James.
Yeah.
So much so that this particular youth conference, which is a conference that's unique. These kids have been saving all of their time on their calendar. These kids don't know the difference, and
Yeah.
they go for one night, and then the next 2 nights they're basically told they can't go, the
Yeah.
chaos.
And I'm just thinking, if you're the youth pastor or whatever, having to explain that to that youth group, hey, we just went to this powerful service,
Yeah,
and you're probably feeling a lot of like spiritual momentum right now, but we're not going back.
right,
And I mean,
exactly.
I'm wondering, did they explain why? And how do you reason that? How do you make that even sound sensible?
Yeah, exactly. And here's the other funny thing, Luke, about this. This is how confusing this culture can be. That auditorium was blacked out, lighting, every song, not one out of three, not two out of three, every song was contemporary.
Hmm.
They had a bass guitar, they had an acoustic guitar, they had synthesizer. I mean, it wasn't like an all out rock deal, but it was very much contemporary. Okay,
Sure.
in that
Yeah.
sense. And I'm thinking, okay, that's not obviously an issue because you would have been all up in arms about that. So I'm in a contemporary setting, feel. I'm preaching from the King James Version, gospel centered, powerful sermon where people came to Christ. But because somebody said, and because I learned, so that's one example. Let me give you a second example. And this was another heartbreak, and um, I so I was scheduled to speak at a conference this was a few years back, and I won't tell you where, I won't tell you with whom, but I was speaking with another guy, and that guy called me and said, "Hey, Brian, I hate to do this to you, man, but this host just doesn't want to have you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, they know that you are friends with," and I won't even name who the guy is. And that guy is a Calvinist. And so they're afraid that you might be a Calvinist. This is true story. True story.
Wow.
It's not that I'm a Calvinist because I'm not. Um, and I'm not necessarily like against everybody who is, and I do have several friends who are, but it wasn't that I was a Calvinist. It's because this IFB church has so beat the anti-Calvinist drum that even the possibility of someone who actually, quote unquote, has a friend who is a Calvinist makes me uncomfortable enough to cancel a keynote speaker at a conference for
Wow.
that purpose. Again, it is cancel culture, not based upon what is being done. It's based upon, again, these issues that have never been front and center, should never be front and center, in what it means to be a fundamentalist.
Mhm.
And then another one was over a different issue, but again was scheduled to be a youth rally speaker at one of my former students' churches, and they when they put the brochure out, I mean, man, they got heckled about uh,
Mhm.
what are you doing with this? What are you doing having this speaker? And what are you doing with this? Don't you know he's not fundamental enough? And this guy who wanted me to come, basically had to bow out. Now, I could go on and on and on about this, but this is the way that things are going
Mhm.
with um and of course on their end they're going to say, hey, we are contending for the faith, we are
Yep.
standing on the word of God. And the problem is they are contending for a faith, they're not
Yeah.
contending for the faith. It's not historic. It's not what the church has stood on historically, a complete devoid understanding of church history, of what we would call historic theology, is a complete weakness here, number one. Number two, a complete overemphasis on something that's not centered on the authority of Scripture, not centered on the true fundamentals of the faith. Create an environment where you would actually be willing to get this, separate from a brother over this, and then me. What's even worse is what we used to call third degree separation or second degree separation, was not
Mhm.
separating over someone for something they did, but separating over someone because of something somebody else did that they didn't separate over them from.
Hmm.
So it's not what
Yeah.
they did, it's that somebody else did something that you don't like, and then this person didn't do what you would do, so then they got separated or canceled from.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting element to this, Luke, and then I'm interested in some of your thoughts here, but there's one other element of this that I think is interesting. I had a leader tell me one time, Bryan, look, you got to be careful not to talk about this particular person or this particular podcast or this particular book or whatever in front of these college students or these future ministry leaders, because they're going to potentially get enamored and go away. And I remember telling this person this in person. I said I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to think that by us not talking about it, they're not going to listen to it. I said the fact
Yeah.
is they are already listening to it.
Yeah.
I think we should speak into the conversation. I think we should be able to have healthy dialogue. I think if you have ideas that cannot hold up in a conversation, you can't have a peaceable conversation with someone, and you have ideas that cannot be tested. You can't read a book for fear of somebody that might get swayed. Um, that is called fear.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a terrible way to lead people out of
Yeah.
fear. I mean, I know institutions, the only books they'll have their kids read in their colleges are from independent Baptists. So,
Yeah.
so they're of course incredibly limited on anything that is solid, anything that's
Yeah.
theological, any kind of commentaries that would be sound or good. It's just a bad. I call it cancel culture because what you do is you isolate yourself in your ideals, and then everybody else that's anything different at all, you have to get rid of them because they are
Yep.
a threat and they are a danger. So, what are your thoughts
Yep.
on that?
Well, we say cancel culture, and the thing that's coming to mind is nowadays what we're associate cancel culture with is kind of leftist ideology, right? Like if you
Oh,
don't align with every crazy agenda of the left, then you're canceled. Or if you say anything that's offensive or racist or homophobic or fill in the blank, you're canceled. And what I've said, and I think we've said this before, even before bringing up this particular topic in this episode, is no, the OG cancel culture, for in my experience, was the independent Baptist world, and they're really following the same playbook that, to use the analogy of the left, that they're following today. They're canceling you for saying anything and everything that's even possibly interpreted as counter to their agenda. It doesn't matter, again, because that's what's interesting about the left side of it. The only people they cancel really are their own. You know what I'm saying? Like, the left cannot cancel Donald Trump, no matter how hard they try. They cannot do it because he's not one of them.
Right.
But they can cancel, any, leftist, celebrity politician. They can cancel them at a heartbeat. So they only cancel their own, which again, we see that's what the independent Baptists do. They only really cancel their own because they can't cancel, somebody who's not one of them. But also with that, the reason they have to do it is because they have to create that echo chamber, that bubble. Because like you're saying, their logic, their reasoning, their ideology does not hold up in discussion. You cannot have a logical discussion about transgenderism. It doesn't hold up because
Right.
men are men and women are women, and there's biological reasons for that. Right. And so that's the same thing with like the extreme right, if you want to call them we can label them as IFB, but just call them, far right leaning, conservative Christians, Baptists, whatever. You cannot have a sensible conversation with them about theology, about anything, because after a while, their ideology, their preferences starts to crumble. And you start to realize that, yeah, everything you're forcing down our throats as a fundamental of the faith, as a theological doctrine, is actually, by and large, most of it is just preferential in nature. It's
Yeah.
traditional. It's not based in the Bible. It's based in what your boy Jack Hyles or whoever said back in the day. It's based on some dogmatic, concept that they came up with. And just to
Well,
see that parallel, so interesting.
it's furthermore interesting to me, and this is another, if I would say, another one of the problems with this particular kind of cancel culture is it's not uniform.
Yeah.
There are so many sectors of the IFB, and there's like too many to name. But if you were just to give a small sampling, you've got the what you would just consider just wacko nutso new IFB, like Steven Anderson type, just
Yeah.
whacked out there. Then you've got, of course, strong King James only ones. Then you've got not only are these particular ones King James only, but then you've got the ones within that King James only crowd who are, let's say, Baptist briders, and they believe in like closed communion and all that sort of stuff, which becomes a huge sticking point for them.
Sure.
Then, of course, then you just go across the aisle just slightly, and you've got what used to be like the Bob Jones type fundamentalism, which is incredibly stringent on worship music. I mean, I got a friend right now, and I mean, if he listens to this, he'll know I'm talking about him. I'm not trying to throw him under the bus, but they're having a conference called the Worship Conference, and their purpose statement is to champion. It's on their website, to champion the cause of conservative Christian music. That's their purpose. And now you don't have to be King James because they're not. But if your music is off, they're going. I mean, they're. I mean, in fact, these same folks told my friend Chris Anderson, who has historically been very conservative in his music, but he's also flexible, and they try to contest him about an issue related to a song he released or encourage whatever. And this is what this guy said to Chris Anderson. He said, "You're making this hard for us to defend." And his answer was, if it's hard to defend, why are we even defending it? And the point at this point, though, okay, if I'm not King James, I can fit into that crowd. I'm talking about old school Bob Jones, because they've never been King James. But if I have the wrong kind of music, I'm going to get canceled there.
Yeah.
Now you look at Pensacola and Bob Jones. Pensacola, Bob Jones, traditional Bob Jones people would consider Pensacola music to be on the left. But then
Which is
Pensacola,
hilarious.
exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
hilarious. But then Pensacola people would consider Bob Jones on the left because they're not King James only.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so there's this like,
Yeah.
then there's like, somebody might be King James only, but they don't have dress standards. And
Yeah.
then this one church would say we can't even play. I mean, I know guys they can't even play basketball against the basketball team because they're wearing pants.
Yeah.
And then I mean I know a friend in Texas that was wanting to host a youth conference, and the guy who was going to speak told them, basically handed him a dress code that the kids all that were going to come needed to abide by, or he couldn't come. And I'm thinking, y'all can't even say. Are you telling me you can't even sit in the same room with another youth group that has girls that wear pants? That is that really? So you see what I mean? It's so
Yeah.
multi-layered and so indirect. And if you turn around and you please one guy here, you don't please the other guy here, and it's like the old story about the guy that got stranded on the island and built and he was discovered several years later, and he had built a house, and he had built this, and the guy's like, "What's this? It's my house. What's this? This is this, and what's this? This is my church." And, "Well, what's that building?" "That's the church I used to go to."
Yeah.
This guy basically separated from himself, and there's many other funny illustrations about that. But the point is, when you have built a ministry outside of scriptural boundaries, then or extra biblical, and then you've instilled extra biblical boundaries, all of a sudden you now are forced to be a cancel culture. There should be a cancel culture when somebody, let's say, doesn't believe the Bible or whatever, doesn't believe in
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. That's scriptural. So I think that's the problem, man. I think the problem is we've defined outside of scripture. We become it's almost a missing mark of legalism. How are we supposed to please these people? And I remember one other funny story about this. As you know, I'm friends with some mainstream, what I used to hear were called evangelicals. Really, they're Bible believing Christians that are
Mhm.
solid. They just didn't grow up in our world.
Yeah.
And I was at lunch with one of them one day, and this is a question he asked me because he's not familiar so much with IFB and King James onlyism and all this stuff. And he's kind of fascinated by it. He said to me, "Hey, what do the independent Baptists think of John MacArthur?" This was a direct question. And I just looked at him and said what was true. I said, "Well, man, they think he's a heretic. And
Yeah.
they think he's a compromiser." And
Yep.
dude, I'm not joking. This guy doubled over in hysterical laughter in the restaurant and had trouble pulling his composure back together, because the truth is, in their world, John MacArthur is the fundamentalist of fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And he is like the most ultra conservative person
Yeah.
that is to be like and that just shows you how much uh, IFB cancel culture is out of touch
Yeah.
with what really is going on, and what we would just call Christianity as a whole, Orthodox Christianity, biblical Christianity. And that's why this cancel culture just and you never know what fire it's going to be on. That's why it's so hard for missionaries. They never know who they're here to try to please, and
Yep.
it's just awful, man. It's just an
Yep.
awful place to be. And I would hope that we would run from this kind of ideology.
Yeah. It really is. What you're talking about there. It's honestly, I remember I remember this being something that I heard from Paul Chappell back in my West Coast days. And it was a very reasonable way to look at it. And it's sometimes I want to say, why don't you follow your own advice? But he would say, the problem with church, how do you say it? He said, I don't want and don't let your church become a one issue church. You
Mm,
become a one issue church at whether, and he didn't necessarily give a bunch of examples, but well, he did. He would say, music or whatever,
mhm,
so, but you become a one issue church, and now you're you're not going to be able to fellowship with anybody else because they don't prioritize your one issue as
mhm.
well as you do. and I've seen that to all, so I would say that to take it a step further, well, there's also one issue movements, it seems like you said, there's some that it is the King James Bible, and that is their issue. They'll let some other things slide, but as long as you use the King James Bible, oh, that guy doesn't wear a tie when he preaches, but he preaches from the King James, or, oh yeah, they have a little bit of uppity music, but they use the King James. But then, like you said, there's the people that their one issue is music. And as long as your music follows their standards, you can preach from whatever Bible and so on and so forth. And so again, it's funny that we hear that from someone like Paul Chappell, because I'm like, well, bro, like, I feel like you're kind of a part of one of those one issue movements yourself.
You bring up a good point. You bring up a good point. The biggest danger of the cancel culture philosophy, and again, we're talking about canceling people over non-centered issues or over some idiot, little niche issue, is what it does to the followers, because the followers are worse. The followers in the church that are listening to their pastor say this and talk about this and make a big deal out of this, they become the Pharisee champions. They become the ones who become very hard to deal with, very hard to follow. I remember when I first came here, I had several people in the church that had been instructed and followed men like this, and some of them, their big thing was actually dress. I remember somebody coming to me, and in my first few months, Pastor, I think that when we go out on visitation, that women should not be able to dress a certain way. And I was like, where is this coming from? Like, I'm just thankful, first of all, anybody would actually show up at this pathetic church that we, that is about to fall apart. Secondly, I'm thankful that anybody would come out and share the gospel. And here you're now suggesting this, and Pastor, we have to have a dress standard. And I said, no, absolutely no, we do not have to have a dress standard, because it became an issue. Like, here we are in outreach, and this is the one thing that you think about. This is the one thing that you're zeroed in on. And the other real touchy thing that they get you on every time is the slippery slope argument. It's like the most used argument. Yeah. And that is, hey, listen, what's next? What's next? And I've always heard all the hardcore IP guys. First thing goes to music. Once music goes, this and
I've heard first thing that goes is Sunday night services. Once you get rid of Sunday night services, everything else is downhill.
It's subjective. Sunday night. Some would say it's Sunday night. Some would say it's worship. Some would say it's Bible. And the inevitable is this: the pastor is going to become an alcoholic. That was I can't remember the pastor that preached the whole sermon a few years back on me. The guy from what's his name? I can't remember his name. He was preaching at the GIBF National Conference, and that was his whole argument, was that next thing you know, we'll be endorsing alcohol and all this kind of thing. And I'm just like, man, that's a fear tactic. It's a fear tactic that has no substance. And so cancel this because you don't know where this is going. And so you keep people in your little herd. Watch out over there. Don't do that. And it sounds real noble, but it has no grounding, and it is a poor way to lead, and it's even a poorer way to treat other brothers. And so I gotta tell you, Luke, I think for me, I've learned that faithful gospel preachers is what defines that is a whole lot more broad than I used to think, because of what I was taught in the cancel culture I was kind of trained in. And I'm not going to live that way. I'm not going to cancel people that I know are faithful. They are Christians. They love God. They preach the Bible. There's 0% chance they're going to get canceled by me.
Yeah. Well, and I know that most people, most of our audience, rather, at this point, well, actually, there's plenty of you out there who you're listening just to find a reason to continue to cancel Bryan. So shout out to all you folks. But I would say most of our faithful audience, you're not this, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're with us, you're listening to us, you're part of the podcast because you maybe have seen or maybe even experienced this cancel culture in that world. And so you're hearing this, you're like, well, yeah, that's just crazy that happened. I would never do that. But I would say, watch out, because you can very easily become the very thing that you hate when you start to, because now, Bryan, what I'm seeing, and this is a whole other thing, we won't obviously open up this right now, but what I'm seeing now is I'm going to use the term recovering fundamentalists, not to call them out specifically, because I know those guys have actually been friends to us over the years, but I'm going to just call out that movement, if you will, and that term. I'm starting to see some of these recovering fundamentalist people. They actually are kind of becoming the very thing that they hate, because they are so anti independent Baptist and anti-conservative approach to church that, you know, they're becoming a little bit judgmental in their own right. And they're almost looking for any reason to continue to cancel the IFB and so forth. So all I'm saying is, like, here's the thing, is what it comes down to is, I think we just agree to disagree in a lot of areas, and we just respect everybody's preferences. Like, look, if your church prefers modern worship and preaching from the ESV, go for it. But if your church prefers traditional worship, suits, ties, and preaching from the King James Version, that's fine. You know, to each his own. But we're not in the spirit of any one method, any one. We're not going to let any one issue that's not truly non-theological become our criteria for fellowshipping or for canceling or not canceling and so forth.
That's a really good point. I mean, you don't want to start canceling the IFB. You know, just because the truth is, almost everybody that I know within the IFB is Orthodox, believes the gospel. Even though they've got preferences that are different, even if they don't call them preferences, they at least are gospel believing, serious about doctrine. So when you start canceling them, you are, exactly like you said, doing the same thing. So, man, we don't want to have cancel culture as a part of what we are trying to do. So, well, guys, we appreciate your time with us today. God bless you. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Church Advancement.